There's a ritual that's been spreading quietly through certain corners of the internet. No mainstream coverage, no trending hashtags, just people passing it along in forums and private groups like something they're not sure they should be sharing. It's called Archon cord cutting. And the people doing it are not your average crystal and sage crowd. We're talking engineers, former military, academics, people who would have laughed at this 3 years ago. They're doing it every night, some for weeks, some for months. And a strange number of them report that nothing much happens at first, and then, around day 10 or 12, something shifts, not always in a comfortable direction. I came across this practice while going deep on Gnostic cosmology for a previous video, and I'll be honest, I wasn't planning to make a full episode on it. But the volume of experiences people were documenting and the consistency of what they were describing made it impossible to ignore. So I went all the way in. I read everything I could find. I mapped the theology behind it. I traced the ritual structure back to its roots. And then, and this is the part I probably shouldn't admit, I tried it myself. 40 nights. What happened by day 12 is the reason this video exists. Stay with me. Before you can understand what cord cutting does, you have to understand what archons are. And that requires going somewhere most modern spirituality refuses to go. Not into vague energy talk, into a very specific, very old cosmological system that was buried for almost 2,000 years and only resurfaced when a set of ancient manuscripts was discovered in the Egyptian desert in 1945. The Nag Hammadi Library. 13 codices sealed in a clay jar, hidden in the cliffs near the town of Nag Hammadi, containing texts that had been systematically suppressed by the early institutional church. And inside those texts was a picture of reality that is either the most unsettling spiritual framework ever devised or one of the most liberating, depending on how far you're willing to go with it. In Gnostic cosmology, the material world was not created by a supreme, benevolent God. It was created, or more accurately, generated, by a lower-tier architect called the demiurge. The word comes from Greek and literally means craftsman or artisan. This being fashioned the physical cosmos from pre-existing material, not from nothing, and according to the Gnostic texts, did so imperfectly. The world we live in is not a divine masterpiece. It is a flawed copy of a higher, truer reality, what the Gnostics called the pleroma, the fullness, the realm of authentic divine light. The archons are the demiurge's deputies, the managers of the lower world. In the original texts, they are described in ways that range from bureaucratic to actively predatory, entities that maintain the structure of the material realm and, more importantly, enforce the soul's amnesia. Because in Gnostic thought, the tragedy is not that we're in a bad world. The tragedy is that we've forgotten we don't belong here. We are sparks of genuine divine light that have become embedded in matter. Before we continue, I want to show you something that could completely change how you see reality. Most people spend years collecting fragments of knowledge without ever finding the complete picture. That's exactly why we built the Reality Codex. It brings together the core principles behind manifestation, Hermetic philosophy, consciousness, and reality creation into one practical system. If you've enjoyed the teachings we've explored on this channel, you're going to love what's inside. You can find it through the link in the description below or by scanning the QR code on your screen. I'll give you a second to do that. And the archons are, depending on which text you're reading, either the jailers or the security system keeping us from remembering that. Now, here's where cord cutting enters the picture. The premise of the practice is that archons don't just exist out there in some abstract cosmological layer. They maintain contact points within your own energetic or psychological architecture, what various traditions would call cords, attachments, etheric links. These are not metaphors in the way the practitioners describe them. They are described as real structural connections to fear-based belief systems, to loops of thought that drain rather than build, to relationships and institutions and internal narratives that keep your awareness oriented toward survival rather than toward gnosis, toward coping rather than knowing. I spent a significant amount of time, I'm talking weeks of reading, not hours, mapping how this Gnostic framework intersects with other traditions that describe similar entities under different names. The archons echo through Kabbalah as the Qliphoth, the shells or husks that exist on the inverse side of the Tree of Life. They appear in Zoroastrian thought as the Daevas, deceptive spirits associated with chaos and corruption. You find structural parallels in certain Tibetan Buddhist frameworks around what are called hungry ghosts, beings defined by insatiable appetite and attachment. The specific details differ. The core architecture is remarkably consistent. Entities or forces below the highest divine level that feed on or benefit from human unconsciousness. What the modern cord-cutting practice does is take this cosmological framework and apply it as a nightly discipline. The logic is this: if these connections are real and persistent, then single-session work won't hold. You have to cut, consistently, over an extended period until the cords either dissolve or the practitioner's awareness stabilizes at a level where they're no longer accessible. 40 days is not an arbitrary number. It appears across traditions: 40 days in the wilderness, 40 days of flood, 40 days of mourning, 40 days of fasting, as a threshold period where something genuinely transforms. Not overnight, through sustained pressure on a single point. Here's where things get specific, and where the accounts that pulled me into this subject get harder to explain away. The core practice, in its most documented form, involves entering a quiet state at night, after the day's noise has settled, and performing a deliberate, visualized severance of the connections described in Gnostic theology. Some practitioners use formal invocations drawn directly from Nag Hammadi texts. Others work with a simplified internal process. Identify the cord, feel where it attaches in the body, and consciously withdraw permission for the connection to continue. No elaborate ritual tools required. No specific tradition you have to belong to. The essentials are intention, consistency, and, this part gets emphasized repeatedly by everyone who describes the practice seriously, a willingness to sit with what surfaces afterward. Because what surfaces is the point. The accounts divide almost universally into phases. The first phase runs roughly from day 1 to around day 8 or 9. This phase is, by most reports, surprisingly quiet. Some people feel a mild sense of relief or lightness after sessions. Some feel nothing at all and wonder if they're doing it correctly. A few report strange dreams, not necessarily nightmares, but dreams with an unusual quality of vividness or emotional weight. But broadly, phase 1 is underwhelming. And this is important because it's where most people stop. They try it for a week, nothing dramatic happens, they move on. The practitioners who get to what happens later are the ones who decided that consistent practice over time mattered more than immediate results. Phase 2 is where it gets interesting. Somewhere in the range of days 10 through 14, and day 12 comes up with enough frequency that it's become almost a landmark in online discussions. Something shifts in the quality of the experience. Practitioners describe it differently, but the pattern is consistent. An increase in resistance. Not external resistance, internal. Old fears surface with unusual intensity. Relationship dynamics that had felt stable start generating friction, sometimes with no obvious external cause. Sleep becomes more disrupted. And several accounts describe something that sits in a difficult category. A sense of presence during the nighttime practice that feels less like imagination and more like something responding. Before we continue, some of what I've learned simply never makes it onto YouTube. That's why we have Insights Academy. a free newsletter where I go deeper into hidden knowledge, ancient wisdom, metaphysics, and the nature of consciousness, the knowledge we don't share in these videos. And when you sign up, you'll receive the Kabbalion as a welcome gift. You'll find it through the link in the description below or by scanning the QR code on your screen. I'll give you a moment to do that. I want to be careful here, because this is the part of the territory where the easy explanations compete with the harder ones. The psychological reading is straightforward. Sustained nightly focus on releasing fear-based attachments will inevitably bring those attachments to the surface. Of course, things get more intense in week 2. You've been consistently agitating a structure that the psyche had organized around. That's not supernatural. That's just how deep psychological work operates. But there's another reading, the one the Gnostic framework itself provides, which is that the intensification around day 12 is not the practice failing, it's the practice working. In this interpretation, the cords being cut are not passive. The system being challenged does not simply release its hold without response. The turbulence is feedback, evidence that something real is being touched. I'm Daniel, and this is Hermetic Talk, and I'll tell you what I personally observed. Around night 11, I finished my session and had difficulty returning to ordinary consciousness afterward. Not in a dramatic way, but there was a quality of awareness in the room that I couldn't explain through tiredness or suggestion. I've been doing this work long enough to know the difference between imagination running hot and something that doesn't fit the categories. What I experienced that night didn't fit the categories. By day 12, the cord-cutting session itself felt entirely different, less like a meditative exercise and more like a negotiation. Something on the other end of the line was being addressed. Whether that something was a part of my own deep psychology or something genuinely external, I genuinely do not know. And I think that honest uncertainty is more useful to you than a confident answer in either direction. Phase 3, roughly days 15 through 30, most accounts describe as a leveling. The intensity peaks and then stabilizes. People report increased clarity in decision-making, a reduced pull toward habitual behaviors they'd been trying to shift for years. Some describe changes in how people around them behave, as if certain relational dynamics had been reorganized at a root level. And several practitioners describe a specific phenomenon that I personally think is the most underrated part of the entire process: a growing ability to catch the moment before a fear-based reaction takes hold. Not to suppress the reaction, to see it forming. That gap between stimulus and automatic response expanding. That, in Gnostic terms, is the beginning of Gnosis, the awareness recognizing itself before it collapses back into the program. Most people who make it to day 40 describe the experience in one of two ways. Either the practice has become so integrated it barely feels like a practice anymore. It's simply what nighttime feels like now, a natural return to a particular quality of awareness before sleep. Or they describe a distinct sense of completion, something closed, a chapter ended. And then, and this is what the Gnostic framework specifically predicts, a new quality of perception that's difficult to communicate. The texts use the word gnosis in a very precise way. Not knowledge as information, knowledge as recognition. The difference between knowing that fire is hot and having touched it. The Gnostic path is not about acquiring better beliefs about reality. It's about the soul's direct recognition of its own true nature, its divine origin, its current situation, and the possibility of its return. What the 40-day practitioners describe as emerging toward the end of the protocol sounds, in many accounts, exactly like that. Not a new belief system, but a shift in the background quality of awareness, a settling, a remembering. Now, and this is where the tradition gets demanding, Gnostic thought does not stop at personal liberation. The framework includes a full cosmological account of why liberation matters beyond the individual. The demiurge, in many Gnostic texts, is not portrayed as evil in the conventional sense, more as unconscious. It created a world according to its own limited understanding, genuinely believing itself to be the highest authority, because it had no direct knowledge of the pleroma above it. The archons in this reading are not malevolent masterminds. They are automatons, executing a program written by a being that itself did not know the full picture. Which means the human being who achieves gnosis has something the demiurge and its agents literally do not have: awareness of the higher reality. The spark that was planted in matter can recognize what the architect of matter cannot. This reframes everything about the cord-cutting practice. You're not engaging in spiritual self-defense against a sinister enemy. You're doing something far stranger and, I would argue, far more significant. You're reclaiming a faculty that the structure of material existence tends to suppress, not through malice, but through design. The world pulls attention toward survival, toward external validation, toward the management of fear. Not because an evil force planned it that way, because that's what a world built by a limited architect produces. And the cord-cutting practice in this light is simply the consistent, disciplined refusal to let that pull go unexamined. I want to address something that comes up repeatedly in the comments of videos I've done on adjacent topics. A viewer named Ariel Voss left a comment after my episode on Nag Hammadi that I've been thinking about ever since. They wrote, "The thing that gets me is that this system was suppressed for a reason. Someone decided this framework was dangerous enough to bury. That's not nothing." And they're right. The early institutional church did not simply disagree with Gnostic theology and let the market of ideas play out. These texts were ordered destroyed. The people who preserved them hid them in clay jars and cliff faces and died without pointing anyone back to where they'd hidden them. What got suppressed here was not fringe mysticism. It was a complete alternative account of creation, consciousness, and the soul's relationship to the divine. One that placed the authority for knowing directly in the individual and required no intermediary institution to validate it. That's a threatening idea. It was threatening then. It arguably remains threatening now. After my 40 days, I sat with the question of what I would tell someone considering this practice. And what I came back to was this: the practice is not for everyone, and it's not for every season. It asks something real of you, not dramatic sacrifice, but consistent attention during a window of time that our modern rhythms work hard to colonize. The hour before sleep is where your phone lives, where your anxieties replay, where the noise of the day takes its final bow. Reclaiming that hour and using it for a practice aimed at structural liberation rather than entertainment or sedation, that is itself a form of cord cutting, before you even begin the formal practice. What the Gnostic framework offers, and what 40 days of this practice seems to demonstrate in the accounts of those who complete it, is not a shortcut to enlightenment. It's a systematic method for identifying the specific attachments, internal and possibly external, that keep awareness anchored in limitation. The cords are not cut once and permanently severed. They require tending. But over time, the practitioners who stay with this describe a different relationship to their own mind. Less automatic, less reactive, more rooted in something that doesn't shift with every change in circumstance. That quality, awareness that can observe its own patterns without being consumed by them, is what every genuine contemplative tradition is pointing at, from different angles in different vocabularies. The Gnostics just had an unusually specific theory about why it's so hard to get there and what you're actually working against when you try.